Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, the AM 950 radio station, the Santita Jackson Show. It's a joy to be with you today on my birthday. I celebrate all month, but boy, thank you for all of the wonderful messages that you all have sent to me. I really, really appreciate it. And boy, I can tell you, do me a favor, get registered to vote. That's my gift. Extend some service and love to somebody, please do that. Just tell somebody you love that you love them and mean it, and show people that you love them, really. And hey, we're in the middle of this convention, so you know we got a lot to talk about today. Hey, Andre. Hey, Crystal. How you doing? Thank you, sweetie. Thank you, and may God bless you, beautiful lady, and handsome God brother, Andre Parker. Thank you for the fish you brought me last night. Appreciated that. Uh, we've got to do a deeper dive into who J.D. Vance is. Who is he? What is Palantir? And I'm going to put you on mute for now, Dr. Gibbs, because we're getting some interference, but I absolutely want to hear from you. And just who is he? Um, he's got a compelling personal narrative, to be sure. But the fact is, he's only been in the U.S. Senate since January of 2023. His entry onto the political stage, really at an extremely high level, has been swift, and it's really been meteoric. But we now see who's behind him. Some of the most influential people in the world. Everybody, I keep telling you that we are now seeing how the sausage is made. On the Democratic side and Republican side, you can see who really controls the parties. It's the donors. It's the oligarchs. If they want you on the ticket, you're safe. If they don't want you on the ticket, even your millions of votes don't matter. And it's important for us to acknowledge that. It's important for us to acknowledge that if we're going to change it. Now, if that's okay with you, not a problem. But if it's not okay with you, it's something to think about. What will Elon Musk get for $45 million per month to the Trump super PAC? What is that about? Ballers, shot callers. That is why he's on this ticket. Who is he? And it also goes into Dr. David Gibbs, historian at the University of Arizona. It goes into who's admitted to these Ivy League institutions. I've shared with you my Harvard story. It was very clear to me that even with the highest qualifications, that it was not really meritocratic. My politics were a problem. So a friend of mine who went into the Ivy League system said, I was pretty much a blank slate when I was admitted. Solid grades, good student, but, and interestingly enough, her record was not as strong as mine, and yet she was admitted to an Ivy League institution. I was told that I was the last person in my class, Dr. Gibbs and Bryce Green, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, to be up for consideration because I was at a public school. I was told this in my Harvard interview. They said, because you're 10th, you're the cutoff. Even though you're a merit scholar and the girl right behind you is one, too. Doesn't matter. Because you're competing against the kids who are at the school where your brother is, which is St. Albans, which is one of the top prep schools in the country. He said, these are the feeder schools for the Ivy League. So, the Sidwell Friends, the Chokes, the Andovers, the St. Albans, Episcopals, everybody, that's real. That's real. But then they also pull people like a J.D. Vance, who has this compelling narrative, who is hungry to be a part of the elite. Let's be clear on that. So, who is he? Who's Peter Thiel? Who's he? Who's Elon Musk? What's Palantir? What do they want? Talk to us. Thank you for the birthday blessings, everybody. Carol, my sister from another mister, D. Ray, sending you so much love. Lorraine, thank you, sweet Lorraine. Andre, that's right. Thank you, Robert. I love it. Joyce Anderson, and you all keep it going until August 1st because I'm going to celebrate all month. Yes, I'm grateful to be here. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. Who is he? Because his wife's narrative is also very compelling. She she has worked at a very, very progressive law firm, and yet she's only clerked for very, very conservative Supreme Court justices. I don't know. You got to help me with that, Dr. David Gibbs. Let's begin with you because wait, there's a sound in your background. Do you have a fan or something going, or an air conditioner?
Oh, yes. Actually, just one
Okay, then
moment.
we will do that. We will mute that. And everybody, please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and like and subscribe. The Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. Please go there and share the show. Everybody, that's my birthday present today. Share the show. And remember, the Rainbow Push International Conference is the 15th through the 17th, just before the Democratic Convention. I want you to come to Chicago, everybody. We're just going to have a good time. It's going to be informal, but it's going to be driven by you. And I want to see you there. And we're hoping that the Rainbow Push International headquarters will be a gathering place where people are coming in to express their opinions. You have 4,000 delegates, but you are expected to have an exponentially higher number of people who want to demonstrate, who want to let Joe Biden and Kamala Harris know, and the Democrats know, what we want them to stand for when they are up for election in the fall. So please, rainbowpush.org so you can get more information, but come on to Chicago to 930 50th Street, also known as Dr. King's Workshop. So let me start with you, Dr. David Gibbs. Well, we still have that sound, but you know what? Let's go
Oh,
for it. Well,
um,
who is, no, it's all right. Who is J.D. Vance? Who is he?
well, as I think it's, he had a very high public profile, of course, before he entered politics due to his book, Hillbilly Elegy. I haven't, I'll be honest, I haven't read the book. I've read many reviews of it. It sounds like it is a genuinely very interesting story it's a familiar one that he had a family that were coal miners in Kentucky who migrated north to Ohio and steel mills in Middletown, Ohio. The steel mills closed, and then the family, which was already somewhat dysfunctional, became deeply dysfunctional. His mother became a heroin addict, abusive, violent. He was subject to, much abuse growing up, extreme disorder growing up. I think he had some bouts of juvenile delinquency when he was a teenager. I think he's pretty open about that. You could say it's kind of an object lesson of how bad economics, not only makes people miserable, but damages their minds and damages their lives and can do so intergenerationally. Oddly enough, I've seen him earlier on. I don't think he said this recently, but earlier on, before he was in politics, he took kind of a right-wing view of this and said, people make choices. People choose poverty. People can choose to get out of poverty. But as far as I could tell, his experience was a testament to how false that is. Okay, he was an exception. He went to Yale. We all know that. Although he went to Yale, I believe, paid for by the military. So he didn't go there. It wasn't entirely. I mean, no doubt he has talent. But the bills for the tuition were paid for in his case. So, but he did seem to take the view of people can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and you don't choose to have your steel mill closed. You don't choose that. You don't choose to have a mother who's a heroin addict. That's chosen by someone other than you. Um, and So, all right. And so in terms of his, elite background, he definitely has an elite background. After going, well, Yale, of course, is the entryway to the elite. I went to Sidley Austin as a law firm, which is, one of the, I believe it's the top law firm in Chicago, one of the top corporate law firms in the world.
In fact, that's where Michelle Obama met Barack Obama. They were both working
Oh,
there.
well, there you go. I mean, the Obamas are, of course, they're thoroughly integrated into the corporate elite. That's how Obama was able to finance his presidential election.
Mhm.
Bork, I think the Reagan era appointee or attempted appointee to the Supreme Court, he failed. He was at Sidley Austin, and so that was the entryway into the top tier of the corporate elite. And from there, he went into venture capital in Silicon Valley, connecting to Peter Thiel, the German-born software mogul, a Republican, of course, very famously a Republican, and became kind of an acolyte of Peter Thiel. And, including, I believe, if not mistaken, Peter Thiel is one of his several companies, Palantir, which has also connections to the intelligence services and to the military. So, he's very interconnected with the elite. I do believe that once he entered the Senate race, he began shedding some of that and became an economic populist, as I've said yesterday. He has said positive things about Bernie Sanders, the Bernie Sanders movement, almost trying to cast himself as the Bernie Sanders of the right in a certain sense. Very socially conservative. He's a religious Catholic, I believe. Although his wife is a Hindu, so there's kind of a not only multiracial but also multi-religious marriage. But all the same, he takes socially conservative views, some of which go beyond. I mean, I'm not. Some of it at least makes me uncomfortable, the extent to which he goes in that direction. But he seemed to combine kind of a social conservatism, and at least publicly, an economic populism. How sincere the populism is at least open to question, just given his extraordinary elite connections. I've mentioned he has good ties to labor unions, notably the Teamsters. He's spoken positively about the minimum wage. He claims to be a trust buster. And so he's carved out a position of sort of, shall we say, economically on the left, at least rhetorically. I emphasize rhetorically, and socially on the right. Someone like Josh Hawley of Missouri. There is definitely a tendency, not just in the Republican Party, but on the right. I read the American Conservative from time to time. There are a lot of articles for like the last 10 years, a lot of articles criticizing free market capitalism, economic inequality, sort of hammering away at it at times. So this is not unique. He's part of a tendency, at least rhetorically, doing these sorts of things. Tucker Carlson, very similarly, formerly on Fox News, also is often very critical of wealth inequality with a social conservatism that sometimes gets, I'll be frank, disturbing. The question is, how sincere is all this, given the fact that he has all these elite connections? And I don't think we can answer that. A couple of points. First of all, every presidential candidate recently, with the sole exception of Bernie Sanders, has had elite connections. I have a colleague, Thomas Ferguson, at the Institute for New Economic Thinking, who's a specialist on campaign contributions to political campaigns, who's gone back, I think he studied all the way back to the 1890s. And Bernie Sanders does stand out as the only really major presidential campaign that did not get any significant elite contributions. It really was all small contributions from ordinary people. But he's the big exception. Generally speaking, everybody who runs for president, who has any serious chance of getting the nomination, has elite contributions. And so Vance is hardly unique in that respect. And it is, the old assumption that if you take a man's money, you take his advice. And it's not as if people give you large amounts of money for your campaign, don't expect something in return. They usually do. They always do. And so, the question is, what kind of deals has he made behind closed doors? Vance, I'm talking about here. And, I think that, only time will tell if there's any seriousness to his sort of break with sort of Reaganomics, or if again, the show. I don't know. Now, an area where I think he's probably more serious is there is a somewhat anti-interventionist aspect to him. This does not apply to Israel. Israel is the great exception to this. He's America first with everything but Israel. And Israel, it's not America first. Trump, of course, has been the same. There's this basic inconsistency in conservatives, with a few exceptions. Thomas Massey of Kentucky, for example. But overall, Israel is a big exception. But on Ukraine, he has shown at least skepticism about the project of arming Ukraine and defeating Russia. And my guess is that when Trump decided in favor of J.D. Vance, it was a signal that he was going to bail on this, project of defeating Russia. Fact of the matter is, the project of defeating Russia has gone very badly. It has not succeeded. There's really, anybody who looks carefully at the evidence can see there isn't the slightest chance Ukraine will win in this war. The best that can be hoped for from Ukraine's standpoint and NATO standpoint will be some sort of stalemate, forever war. A much more likely scenario is Russia will flat out win on the battlefield, or in a negotiated settlement in coming months. It may even happen. We don't really know when this will happen because there's all sorts of intangibles, but you could see a major crisis on the battlefield during the election. And my guess is that the way Trump and Vance will respond to that is to pull the plug on the whole operation. I should add that if you look at militarist circles, NATO circles in Europe and the United States, the thing they are most fearful of Vance about is as an indicator that he's going to bail on the Ukraine war. They're terrified of that. This is absolutely apoplectic about the possibility that the plug will be pulled on this, what they see as a vital project. If I'm not mistaken, I believe there were elite elements all along. Earlier on, the Club for Growth, I believe, was critical of Vance's statements against free market capitalism. The Club for Growth, I think, has come around and endorsed him, getting on the bandwagon, I guess. But I believe earlier on they were critical of him as, I think they even used the word anti-capitalist, as if he's a socialist or something. That Vance has never claimed that. I'm sure there's nothing to that. That's a silly accusation. But I believe that they did express criticism of him earlier on, which might suggest there's some sincerity to his turn towards economic populism. I don't know. There's a whole series of question marks involving Vance and Trump in terms of what will happen in Trump's second term. If I had to bet money on it, my bet would be on domestic policy. The first term would probably look just like the second term will look pretty much like the first term, which is economic populism and rhetoric, but policies that favor the rich. That is what he did in the first term. And I would guess that's what he'll do in the second term, but we don't know. It's possible. We're in the process of a major realignment in American politics. And there's this big demand in the electorate for some kind of authentic populism that is anti-interventionist in foreign policy, that favors butter over guns, and that it breaks with free market capitalism. It'll finally make some efforts to rectify the problems of wealth and equality that have grown in this country over the last half century. There's certainly a demand for that in the electorate on both sides of the aisle politically. Bernie Sanders was one response. Donald Trump, much more fake response, but nevertheless. Vance is yet another response to this. Where it will all go is anybody's guess.
Well, upon what basis are conservatives attacking free market capitalism? And upon what basis are they highlighting economic inequality? Because I listen to Tucker Carlson constantly. I'm always like you. I'm not incurious intellectually. I want to know what people think and how they arrive, not just their conclusions. I want to know how you get there, because you don't jump to conclusions, you arrive there. So, like, what is your worldview? When you when you dig down into Tucker Carlson's background, and he's so staunchly pro-family. Well, he's had a lot of issues with his mom, right? A lot of these people have had a lot of stuff going on in their personal lives, which have driven their public policies. A lot of pain. A lot of them don't come from happy places. And so, just help me with that. I mean, what is driving that? Because maybe that can help us to understand hillbilly elegy. Because even the title hillbilly, many people objected to, because they said, well, he's serving, stereotypes. And he said, no, I'm proud to be a hillbilly. I'm proud of this. But tell me, I mean, how does a conservative attack economic inequality?
In a lot of ways, it is very similar to the way the left attacks inequality. I'm thinking in particular of an article I've seen in the American Conservative, which easily could have appeared in Jacobin. It isn't really that different from the types of critiques Bernie Sanders was doing during the election, that, people are entitled to a decent life. And they are not having a decent life in many cases due to the fact that wages have been stagnant or gone down in many sectors, that economic insecurity has increased, that this has a tremendous toll psychologically and socially, that all of these points are made. And you are seeing kind of a breakdown of ideological categories. I never thought I would see that, because I grew up in an era when left was left and right was right. I'm much more comfortable with that, I might say. That is breaking down at least somewhat. And you are getting, messages from the right, people who self-identify on the right, and are right certainly on social issues, like Tucker Carlson is, like the American conservatives, like Vance is, but nevertheless take views on foreign policy and economic policy that do sound, at least rhetorically, a bit more like they come from the left. Some of the critiques, you get on foreign intervention. I read antiwar.com, which is the best source, undoubtedly the best source for anti-war information. It's an aggregator on the web. It's a libertarian site. I'm not a libertarian. I'm from the opposite direction. But the critiques they make of U.S. foreign policy could very easily come from Noam Chomsky. In fact, Noam Chomsky has endorsed the site. Um, and so you are getting this breakdown of ideological categories, and the justification they make for their people like Carlson would make for. Oh, first of all, let me say I didn't know about his personal issues. I was unaware of that. I don't really know much about him, except that he did come from an elite family. I know that, but he nevertheless does seem to have what seems like authentic empathy with working class people to some degree. At least that's how he presents himself. I didn't know about the issues with his mother. That may very well play into it. Often personal issues do play into these things. There's no doubt about it. But when he describes, when I hear him describe, the damage being done by deindustrialization, by sort of permanent unemployment, things of that type. Sometimes I feel like I am listening to Bernie Sanders or one of my left-wing colleagues in not in academia, because he doesn't have that kind of style, but nevertheless, there is kind of almost a left-wing tone to his sound when he discusses economics, and so it's kind of funny because on the one hand we have this extraordinary polarization and polarized ideological hatred in the country. On the other hand, the ideological lines are much blurrier than they ever have been in my lifetime, and I'm not sure where it's going. I don't think anybody really knows where it's going. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Santita.
I thought it was me, but I'm going to put you on mute because we're still getting that sound, but you're giving us such great information. Stay right there. Bryce Green, it's okay. These technical, we're living in this technological age. But hold on one second, Dr. Gibbs. Bryce Green?
Yes, ma'am.
Who is J.D. Vance? I mean, because I think that understanding this right, understanding him from the right, and I thank you, Dr. Gibbs, for helping us to look at that, is very important because you can get thrown off. I'm with you, Dr. Gibbs. Sometimes it's much more comfortable if the lines were more clear. But, I remember when Reverend Jesse Jackson had a march through Appalachia to highlight poverty, Black, white, and brown poverty. A person who joined him on, I think, 1/3 of the leg was Jerry Falwell. Because he said, I grew up white and poor in Appalachia. I'm with you, Reverend. I'll work with you on this. And so, but before we even get there, I'm struck by the $45 million that Elon Musk said, look, I'm going to contribute that monthly to the Trump super PAC. Peter Thiel, they're both pulling for J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, who's been in the U.S. Senate for a year. And now he is going to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. Talk about ballers, shot callers. The voters had nothing to do with it. Forget Nikki Haley, I guess. But it also goes down to the comfort of the candidate. But who are these actors? Because it seems to me, Dr. Gibbs and Bryce Green, that we have these unelected people of unimaginable wealth who are driving our political process.
No, absolutely. And that's a key feature of what's called American democracy, is that Americans have the ability to vote in elections, but the selection process that determines which people are going to be on the ballot is completely opaque, and sometimes it's completely irrelevant. Like you said, there was a Republican primary for Republicans to decide who they wanted to be in charge of them. And, there were a lot of people who got some votes and got a lot of attention from the public, but they were ignored. the decision to pick J.D. Vance wasn't made by the Republican rank and file. It wasn't made by the general public. It was made by a group of elites who have significant influence over the Republican Party. And those elites, they represent a lot of different interests, but J.D. Vance specifically has been one of the most Silicon Valley connected politicians in our lifetime. Vance, as Gibbs said, got his start from humble beginnings. He was, from Appalachia, from a poor family that was decimated by the deindustrialization of the American heartland. And so that does give him a legitimate perspective on the plight of everyday working Americans. But he seemed to take from this the completely wrong lessons rather than focusing more on structural issues. Things like how government policy and offshoring affect him directly. He seems to put more emphasis on the choices of individuals and their alleged desire to keep themselves poor, or their inability to raise themselves up out of poverty. And he sees himself as a shining example of what could be, of what ought to be, and what should be normal, without really understanding that he's the exception who was selected for his high stature. And all of that worldview seems to vibe perfectly with the Silicon Valley mentality, which is generally a right-wing libertarian worldview. People like Elon Musk, people like David Sachs, people like Peter Thiel have this libertarian maverick worldview that, despite all the government subsidies, despite all of the fact that their entire businesses wouldn't exist without state intervention, they seem to believe that state intervention is the problem, and that corporations and individuals can lift themselves up through the strength of their own work. And so when they see someone like J.D. Vance, who has these legitimate working class bona fides, but without the serious critique of American capitalism that should come from that, well, then they see someone who is able to advance this faux populism that's been really taking the world by storm since the Trump years. Happened in Brexit, happens with Marie Le Pen in France, happens all over the world. But this faux populism is one that uses the aesthetics of appealing to the working class, talking about the real issues they face, and often pointing to the very real enemies that they have. But it doesn't offer anything in the realm of serious structural change to the American body politic. What it offers is, again, more of the same, more corporatization of the nation, more subsidies to Silicon Valley, more venture capital, more hedge funds, more high finance, all of that. And so you're able to sell all that package using these working class aesthetics and using these working class tropes and talking points. And so J.D. Vance truly represents that faux populism running cover for some of the richest people on the planet. Now, Peter Thiel, who was an interesting character in his own right, part of the original founders of PayPal, one of the original investors in Meta, or in Facebook, as it was called then. And he was recently on the board until he stepped down or I think two years ago. But he's one of the most influential people in the world, not only because of his influence in politics. He was one of the people who saved Trump's campaign after the Access Hollywood tapes. He started donating to him in order to curry favor with Trump, knowing that he's one of the real people who seriously have his back in adversity, and started rallying support, made it normal to keep giving money to Trump. But he's also been cultivating an empire of big tech. One of the corporations that J.D. Vance got his start at was called Mithro Capital. Now, Mithro, of course, being the mythical metal from Lord of the Rings. You'll find that as a major theme with these guys, Lord of the Rings names. But Mithro Capital was part of Peter Thiel's foray into big tech. And one of the major projects that Peter Thiel has been using his company called Palantir, which, again, another Lord of the Rings reference. to be a massive data analytics and surveillance company aimed at collecting data from disparate sources to, well, vaguely they'll describe it as making business decisions, but it can be used for all sorts of things, all sorts of insights, and all sorts of tracking over different sources. And it's being used by many different defense and intelligence agencies around the world. So he's a defense contractor, and he's part of the military industrial complex. And all this, working class trappings, the fact that he's tapping someone like JD Vance to be, I guess for lack of a better word, his minion, just shows how the military and how the war machine is trying to integrate itself into these working class politics. And Teal has been not only cultivating all these things, but he's also been funding a lot of the alternative media scene through these different podcasters, these different sites. They seem to be part of this whole socially conservative yet somewhat critical of American capitalism, yet not offering any real solutions type of character that have been popping up around in the media ecosystem. Like cryptocurrency bros, these faux libertarians. And as Dr. Gibbs said, that there are libertarians who have serious critiques of American empire and American capitalism. But what Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance seem to represent are those segments of this libertarian movement who are more oriented towards preserving and enhancing American capitalism. And so when we see J.D. Vance talk about his concern for the working class, when we see Trump talking about how he represents a more legitimate working class strain in American politics, while this may have some elements of truth, the Democrats are very oriented towards the professional classes rather than the working classes. It has to be understood as a rhetorical tool to implement policies that don't benefit the working class. And if you're able to sell it, as you did with someone like Josh Hawley or these other faux working class people, well, then you'll have a situation where people from Appalachia, people in these heartland areas, people who have been decimated by the American economy and who have very legitimate grievances, they will channel those legitimate grievances into a figure or into a political movement that doesn't really have anything to offer. And that's what it seems to be happening with J.D. Vance.
Should we be concerned? Because this is something corporate media. I'm going to first ask you, Bryce, and then Dr. Gibbs. They're not digging down and asking these questions. But, hold on, Bryce, because I know Dr. Gibbs is going to have to run. And I encourage everyone to get his book, The Revolt of the Rich. Go to Amazon. I know he smiles every time I do it, but it's so important because that will... Power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, it never will. Frederick Douglass told us that. And physics tells you that every action merits an equal and opposite reaction. Really, we developed a new republic after the Civil War, and we got a new republic, quite frankly, when we ended apartheid in America, officially, right? And so you've seen the oligarchs, the rich, push back. And that's why you need to read this book so that you can really understand what we're going through right now, because now the oligarchs are cloaking themselves in guises of entertainers. Now we see Jay-Z working with a billionaire to undercut public education because that's what charter schools do. That's what they do. $300 million project. Yeah. And you see them in politics. They come off as populists, and they're faux populists. They are. And I'm wondering, before you go, Dr. Gibbs, how we should take all of this. Because I'm wondering, because when you listen to J.D. Vance, he can almost get you unless you start listening to him. And I saw an interview with his Yale Law School roommate, who's a Democrat. And he said, I wanted to be supportive of him, but then I just said, no, he's going down a road that does not make me comfortable. And ideologically and philosophically inconsistent, and it just lays bare his ambitions. I mean, because he's part of the military industrial complex too. I'm not slamming our veterans at all. I'm a grandchild of them. My grandparents are buried in Arlington right now. I mean, but I'm a pacifist also. So so there's that. So I mean, talk to me, because who are we looking at, Dr. Gibbs? I mean, just help me to understand. Wait a minute, I got to unmute you. Who we are looking at.
Well, yeah, as Bryce Green noted in some detail, well, you have in America as a system where most people get to vote once because it's a nominal democracy, but the very wealthy, those with accumulated wealth, get to vote twice with their money.
Mm.
And you might say that the second vote is much more influential than the first, especially if you have a lot of money. You can really drive processes, not only in terms of influencing politicians, but influencing public opinion. You can pour money into influencing public opinion through think tanks and through universities. People forget a lot of faculty at universities are being subsidized by wealthy people to act as shills for them.
Say
Like,
that again, please.
yeah, a lot of university faculty are act as shills for wealthy people, are funded by them. Milton Friedman was, in essence, not only an economist, he was a lobbyist, really, a very well-funded lobbyist with a lot of money behind him. He was a talented economist. He was very intelligent, but that wasn't enough. He also had money behind him, which is why he was so influential. But and so people tend to forget that very often. The role of money in politics is not just votes; it's also money.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that Vance is a product of that system, and very consciously a product. He's extremely ambitious. He's very much aware of his talents and his high intelligence, and wants to use them to get ahead and ahead and ahead to the very top, where he's headed. That's for sure. And that is no doubt that's part of his position here. And he's an acolyte of Peter Thiel, one of the richest men in the country, one of the most powerful men in the country. There's this libertarian ethos among the very rich that fits very nicely into their interests, and it's an ideology of sorts, somewhat misleading ideology, because yes, they get all these subsidies at the same time as they're advocating deregulation. So that's the context in which we're seeing the rise of someone like Vance. On the other hand, people do vote, and people who are voting, many people who vote for the Republican Party, many working class people of all races, increasingly, are really do want something different economically from what we've been having for the last 50 years. Reaganomics is not popular with the public, right? They've been trying to sell it, and it's their ability to sell it by the Republican Party is waning. And I think there's an awareness of that. And so Vance is responding to, at least rhetorically, the public's getting sick of this process. I should add, he did indeed, as Bryce said, he did a few years ago. He was talking about the poor have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They make their own decisions. They choose to be poor. They choose to be successful. Look at me, etc. Yes, I think he's suddenly walked away from that position, perhaps opportunistically. I don't know. Maybe he's authentically changed his mind. It's hard to say. I suspect probably more likely opportunistically. Bottom line is a big question mark here. I guess that I share Bryce Green's skepticism about the authenticity of anything anybody says in politics, including Vance. And there are very good reasons to doubt that there's any sincerity to it, or that it'll go anywhere in terms of policy. The best bet would be the second Trump term would look like the first Trump term. If Vance ascends to the presidency, which is a perfectly plausible scenario, he very likely would pursue these kinds of wealth concentrating policies, just like past Republicans and past Democrats. But we don't really know. He does have to face an electorate that does not like these policies. And he's verbally, at least, broken with them to some degree. And he certainly is broken verbally with the kind of unrestrained interventionism that U.S. foreign policy has followed, despite all of his military connections. And the military-industrial complex, at least some elements of it, have been very openly hostile towards him. So I would say is a series of question marks here, more question marks than we've ever had before during my lifetime, as to where politics is going. Most likely, the best bet, again, the safest bet, is it'll go on just like it has before, with no break in precedent, no change in policy, really, of any substantive sort. Change in rhetoric, but not a change in policy. That's the safest bet. But then again, that may not be the case. It's possible there will be some authenticity to what we're seeing here, and that things will get very interesting on that account. And so, I think the future is open by definition, obviously, but I think more so than ever before because of the breaking down of ideological lines at the rhetorical level. And once you commit yourself verbally, it's not impossible, but it's more difficult to walk away from those commitments, especially when the electorate is sold on them. So I don't really know where this is going, I guess we'll see. Unfortunately, I do have to go. I hope you have a happy birthday, Santita. It's been a pleasure being on with you, Bryce, as always, and have a great day, everybody.
You too, Dr. Gibbs.
Bye-bye. Let me get off this way.
Oh, Santita, you're muted again.
All right, here we go. So, what do you see? Because see, we're now seeing, I guess, the down and dirty of politics. Who really controls the process? You really do see that there are still smoky rooms where decisions are made, because this decision on J.D. Vance and, quite frankly, in the Democratic Party right now, they're being made out of the line of public vision. You have the oligarchs in both parties who are the ball of shot callers. They're telling you 14 million votes, Biden, and I have not been an uncritical supporter of President Biden, but I'm talking about process, everybody. And I think the process was flawed because you should have had space. The party should have made space, or should I say the corporation, because that's what we really need to call these entities. They're corporations. They should have made space for more people to run, because you could have felt better about this process. But you were basically railroaded into, particularly on the Democratic side, into a candidate. We were. And now he's being talked about, oh, don't hate the player, hate the game. Now they're trying to railroad him off the ticket, even though 14 million people voted for him. I mean, and so as we look at these military interventions, he is not an interventionist except for Israel. And yet he's a veteran. But he's sponsored by a military contractor. Come on, Bryce. How am I supposed to take this? And everyone, I want to thank you for your birthday wishes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I'm sending you so much love today.
Well, yeah, if I haven't said it on air, happy birthday.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. That's what I'm wearing, and that's why I'm glittering this morning. It's happy birthday. It's my birthday. I have it in pink also. I'm going to wear that. There you go. But I mean, but how are we supposed to take this? Because this is hard to. I was bringing all of that up, Bryce, because it's hard to read, and we're going to be talking in the next hour about President Biden and this push that he has in the Black community. I mean, really, because you don't see him all over the Catholic churches, and he's Catholic. You see him in Black churches on the weekend. You see him at the NAACP. You see him appealing to Black people. Okay, right. We're very important, but but George Clooney, someone who does not resonate in the Black community, can write an op-ed piece in the New York Times. Number one, how did he get published in the New York Times? And it set the party on fire. This is just so. I mean, you're the corporate spokespersons in tone. Oh my goodness, this is major. George Clooney has called for Biden to step down. I said, major to whom? It's not major to me. Well, he and President Obama are close. Good for them. That does not have anything to do with me right now. So help me.
Right. I mean, it's this idea that American democracy isn't controlled by the interest or directed by the interest, desires, and concerns of the general public, but rather the interests and concerns of a very specific elite. I mean, the fact that you can get a white celebrity to publish something in an elite journal and then call that a watershed moment for the party. There's nothing inherent about publishing an op-ed in the New York Times that makes anything a watershed moment. It means that elites in the party are using this moment to enact their own agenda. And their own agenda seems to be right now, or at least it was, getting Joe Biden out. Now it seems that after Trump's shot, democracy is no longer on the ballot, and the most important thing is to be nice and respectful to Trump. So I guess that's their that's their motivations now. But generally speaking, when you have people who are selected for roles like this, they're selected for a reason, and it's not because they are champions of the people. I mean, elites aren't going to pick champions of the people. I don't think I need to explain that in any detail to any of your listeners. It's because that they're champions for the elites. And when you have someone young like J.D. Vance, I think it's similar to what the Democrats had in Pete Buttigieg. He wasn't very popular in terms of the general public taking him seriously and working class people thinking that he can fight for them. But he had an elite background and appealed to elites, and his campaign was able to cultivate a lot of elite support. And so he was able to leverage that into, all these media appearances, these fawning articles, these nice interviews, these nice articles. All of that was because he served somebody who found him useful. And, it's especially at this moment where the aging boomer population is losing legitimacy in the public eye. They'll keep Dianne Feinstein up there. They'll keep Joe Biden. Well, actually, Joe Biden he's older than a boomer. But they'll keep these people who are ancient and decrepit, and they're losing legitimacy in the public. And so when they have a young face to implement some of the same policies, maybe a different coating of rhetoric on top, but when you have young people, it means that you're able to legitimize the empire and legitimize the regime of corporatocracy that we have with the new generation. And so Pete Buttigieg and J.D. Vance seem to be two sides of the same coin, both involved in Silicon Valley. Of course, Vance to a more significant degree, but both of them picked by higher ups in the party to represent a new generation of more of the same. And both of them seem to be both of them seem to lack the legitimate popular base that would make any of the working class rhetoric legitimate and make sense and seem more authentic. And so that's what seems to be happening on both sides of the aisle. They're trying to usher in a new generation of compliant people, of people compliant to the corporatocracy, and they're using this working class rhetoric to do it.
It's like it's the controlled opposition, right?
Right.
Because we're looking, we have to be clear, everybody. We're in a post-Tea Party, post-Occupy world. And the Republicans and Democrats co-opted both of those movements, which were populist movements that arose from an anger, quite frankly, and I never made them right or left. The Tea Party came when Wall Street came for us, and I was with it. I said, yeah, because why should I? How is it that the head of Goldman Sachs can go to the Speaker of the House? The Speaker of the House, basically the head of the legislative branch of our government, and say, if you don't give me $700+ billion after I've given you $20 trillion, let's be clear. After they did the forensics on the bailout, it was more than $20 trillion that our government gave to Wall Street, which, by the way, is now offshore. Yeah. So he said, look, if you don't give me this $770 billion by the end of business today, we are going to shut the economy down on Monday. This was on a Friday. And when Americans heard about that, you remember that, Bryce, Americans went crazy, went ham, shut down the communication system in the legislative branch of government. It was so momentous that they changed the number of calls and emails that you are now able to send to your representative, because Americans busted the system. And so now we're watching in the Democratic and Republican parties, Bryce, you're watching these unelected people who really determine who gets on the ticket, who gets pulled off the ticket, who gets into the White House, and it shapes what they say once they get there.
Yeah. One author that I think is very useful for this moment to understand J.D. Vance is Thomas Frank.
Mm.
Frank wrote "What's the Matter with Kansas" back in the day, back in I think 2015, trying to figure out what's going on with this new populist sentiment in the country. But recently, he came out with a book called "The People Know," which is a history of populism and anti-populism. And then he talks about how well, populism has long been co-opted by the right
Mm.
or by elites in general, because legitimate populism is such a common strain that it needs to be controlled. In
Mm.
fact, even the term populism being used in a negative sense these days, especially in the Trump years, there was all these articles and pundit talking segments about the dangers of populism or whatever. Well, I mean, because they associate populism with things like mob rule, just an angry rabble of poor, dirty people who don't know their own interest and can't tell their hand from their behind. That's what the elites truly think of them. And so when actual populist sentiment comes into comes into vogue in the political discussions, well, there's only one way they can handle it, and that's by capturing these populist movements and replacing these populist policies with anti-populist policies,
Mm.
with elite policies, and using the language of populism to surround and to bamboozle and distract people. And it seems to be a very common point in American politics that whenever you have a dire situation, be it the aftermath of the '08 crash, when people were learning the realities of what happened when you get kicked out of your home, when you learn that the government simply let the banks do it, that they let the banks get away with all this criminal behavior. Well, then by 2011, you had the Occupy movement. Of course, that was a representation of that sentiment, of that populist, anti-corporate, anti-finance sentiment. And well, the Democratic Party decided to adopt some of those slogans and adopt some of that rhetoric. If you'll recall, the 2012 campaign was largely framed as Obama, the working class hero, versus Mitt Romney, the Bain Capital, monopoly man. But in reality, Obama was supported by Wall Street from the start. From
Absolutely.
the start. Even in '08, he was having conversations with Goldman Sachs. They helped pick his cabinet because he was very compliant to them. But even then, in 2012, that rhetoric was used against the Republican Party and in favor of Obama. And the end result was, again, more elite policies. Well, what was the most populist policy Obama ever did? I mean, I don't know, but most of his policy suite seemed to be oriented towards preserving the status quo, towards enhancing the stature of these corporate giants like the banks and the mortgage firms and the defense contractors, the healthcare companies, especially, all the while talking a big populist game. So this is a very common thing in the American public. I mean, you'll see it again. You saw it again with Trump. Trump was talking about I'm for the working class, I'm for the people, and then his tax cuts were one of the single largest wealth transfers to the billionaire class in generations. And of course, the wealthy class, they thanked him for that. They thanked themselves for picking someone who was able to appeal to the general public, to the working class, to the
Mhm.
populace, while implementing policies that benefited the elite. That's always been the game. And of course, the Democrats don't have anything to offer in terms of actual populist policies. So it seems that in 2024, they're opening a lane for Trump to run on this working class platform again. And picking J.D. Vance to be or right by his side seems to be a way to enhance that. So even though they're very obviously going to be implementing a slew of elite focused, elite oriented policies, tax cuts, deregulations, etc., they're going to have this working class, pro labor, pro worker rhetoric that the Democrats won't be able to combat because their record is so bad. So it's a system that feeds into itself in a lot of ways. but the goal is to ensure that no legitimate working class movement is able to take political power, and that any working class rhetoric is able to be manipulated or folded back in to an elite program.
Bryce Green, everybody, fairness and accuracy in reporting. Of course, our love to Dr. David Gibbs. Get his book. Get his book. Of course, it is the Revolt of the Rich. Hey, everybody, this really is about Dawn. I hear you because you're saying Ivanka and Jared. How much? The thing is, what we're trying to do is help you to see the rot in the system. You have two parties that are different wings of one bird. There's a reason things don't change for us. It's because you've got two corporate entities. These are the Democratic and Republican parties. I repeat, they are not dispensed by the government to oversee the election. They are private corporations. You could create your own party and name your own board. And then the board can overthrow, as they do in the corporate world, they overthrow the CEO. Who's the candidate? That's all. And you don't get mad about it. Understand it. Understand it. This is the game. Understand the game. Don't hate the player. You can get upset with me all you want. But I'm talking about, I've been in it. I've been in the room. I'm bringing you the benefit of what I learned 40 years ago. We were like, wow, this is how people get selected to get on the ticket. This is how this works. Yeah, this is how this works, y'all. That's what I'm trying to let you know. You deserve to know. If when they came up with the founding documents of our government, it is reported that a lady in the crowd, and they identified her, they asked Benjamin Franklin, "What kind of government have you given us, sir?" He said, "A republic, if you can keep it." If you refuse to ask questions, if you refuse to be critical, Teddy Roosevelt said, it is the highest form of patriotism to engage in dissent. If you refuse to do that, and if you come on this chat line and try to shut it down, let's discuss 2025. Let's get out of 2024 first, Dawn. Discuss this. That's going to get you to 2025, because guess what? You're going to have some Democrats who support that too. Everybody's talking about 2025. No one's talking about the selection process and the election process in 2024. The election process has been subverted, and the selection process is on, and you ought to be mad about that. Think about it. Don't get off track here. I won't let you do that. So everybody, let's go over and talk about President Biden, because he's pushing with black folks. Save me, save me. Oh, you can't make this stuff up. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show, everybody. Click the link, share the show. Back in just a minute.